my name is Dan Whelan, Senior Reporter for Place Northwest. We're here in Leeds at UKREiiF, talking all things heritage and retrofit with Purcell. I am joined by Jo Bartle, partner at Purcell, and Laura Barron, the company's head of sustainability. Hello. First question, what is Purcell's approach to retrofit and sustainable building design?
So we take a holistic approach to sustainability. It means different things to different people. To us it means preserving our inherited world for future generations, and that aligns really closely with a conservation approach. And when we talk about retrofitting existing buildings, we take an approach that starts from a position of knowledge. So we try and gather as much information about that building as possible, its context, its location, its significance, its condition, and then we use that to kind of base any proposals on. And it really takes an understanding of the building as a system, so interconnected materials, functions, users, that then the proposals can be formed from a position of knowledge. Okay.
And how well informed do you think the property industry is in general about this approach? How much educating are you having to do?
A fair amount, to be honest. I think there's a definite lack of knowledge in relation to older buildings, and so obviously, as you know, there's a huge number of buildings that were built before 1919, and they perform very differently to buildings that are constructed more recently, and so they were kind of, you're looking at a lot more solid wall construction, and that kind of has what we call sort of breathable performance, so it absorbs moisture from its surroundings and releases it according to the environments, and so that takes a very different approach to retrofit than a new build, and so it's kind of understanding all of those complexities.
Excellent. Jo, when discussing sustainability, what can we learn from heritage assets and the conservation approach?
Yes, well, the buildings that we work on have been around for years. They're built to last. Take it for instance, I've been working for 10 years at Auckland Castle. That's been around for 900 years. So the 10 years that we've been working on that is a very small window in the lifespan of that particular building. So looking at how we can learn from those buildings, I suppose it's about locally sourced materials. They probably come from a quarry just down the road. These buildings were probably built by the local people as well, so they feel they're embedded within the communities right from the beginning and when they were constructed. So there's plenty that we need to take from learning about the building's heritage to then inform how we look and adapt the buildings going forward.
Yeah, and it's tricky business, isn't it? These heritage buildings are not easy to work with. You know, they're old and crumbly, and you have to be very delicate with them. So, what are the most common issues that arise when working with this type of building, Jo?
Inappropriate installations. Quite often we'll go into the first starting point of one of our projects is actually taking out what has been put in inappropriately, that's not compatible with the building fabric, and therefore you see inherent defects, so whether that be mould growth or cement pointing and the sort of deterioration of stonework and brickwork as a result of that, or inappropriate use of insulation. So quite often we're go back to first principles, understand the building fabric.
There's a phrase they use in planning, I think it's something like insensitive modern additions or something like that.
Yeah.
When talking about like the bits that have been added on that you just need to get rid of straight away. Because I guess what was the problem? The planning policy wasn't strict back then to stop these sorts of things. Is that?
I think people's opinions changed, and on what the significant elements are of a building. Okay. So I think that those inappropriate, at the time they were probably based on a need,
right,
and a brief that was required, by the client and the end users at the time, and I suspect also without actually appreciating what the longer term impacts of those alterations might have been. So sort of the impact of cement pointing on buildings. People thought it was great at the time because it was long lasting, it was durable, but actually only, we can see now that actually when placed against a softer material like brick or stone, it actually has detrimental impact on the building fabric. So I suspect it's an education. So when we talk about putting in new sort of alterations and new introductions and new methodologies of retrofit, it's about making sure that we understand the building fabric first before we then consider putting things back in, and that's built on 75 years of experience at Purcell of how buildings function and what is compatible and what isn't compatible.
Okay, that's interesting. And what about talking about the issues that arise? I guess one of the issues around doing this kind of work is having people who have the skills to do it. Are there enough people who are skilled like yourselves to be able to look at an old building and decide what's happened and what needs to be done?
That's certainly, I think, potentially a challenge for the industry, is to make sure that there are sufficient people with that knowledge, not only from a specification point of view, but actually the actual building works, and making sure that we don't lose those crafts and skills that go with the actual implementation. Through the projects that we're working on, we're social value and engagement with the community is key to the projects, and that happens right at an early stage. Before we've even really kind of locked down the brief with the client, we will spend time understanding what it is the community need and want, and through that they will learn and understand how we operate as a business, looking at historic buildings and proposing alterations and changes to them. That process follows right the way through the project, and that engagement is key to drum up excitement. And as excited as Laura and I are about existing buildings and working with existing buildings, we want that passion to come through with the schools and the colleges and universities that we work. So quite often we'll take on apprentices on our projects and within our studios to get them at the sort of entry level of the industry.
So what can be done to help make the conservation first approach more attractive to developers? What can be done to make them choose retrofit over demolition?
I think for me, one of the things that I'm really interested in is looking at the value beyond kind of monetary value, so beyond capital expenditure and cost per square metre. And I think that's the kind of mindset that we've got stuck in the construction industry. And actually what we can learn from the heritage sector is that we think about historic buildings in a different way, and we value them in a different way. And so we look at the architectural value, the historic value, the kind of communal and cultural value. And I think using those lessons, we can try to think about all existing buildings in a slightly different way, and start thinking about kind of material value, or the fact that you're saving carbon because you're not using those materials, or you're avoiding waste going to landfill. And so I think that's something that can hopefully help bring people along on the journey. But there's also kind of really pragmatic things around tax incentives for reusing existing buildings rather than new builds. So new builds are currently zero rated tax, and it's not the same for refurbishing existing buildings, which is a huge flaw in our system.
There's early stage talk about a grade 3 listed status, which would, to put it simply, would mean that you could not demolish any building unless it was structurally unsafe. This feels like opening up a can of worms. Is this a positive thing?
It's definitely the right conversation. Whether or not it's the right solution is still up for debate. I think it's a really important conversation to have, because 60% of our waste in the UK comes from construction industry, which we need to address. And we have all of these existing buildings that we are a resource, they're a kind of material bank, and so we need to get out of the mindset that we just demolish and build new. And so this is starting that conversation, and it's a really important conversation to have. And I think it's been latched to the listing because people think of listing as it means you can't do anything to a building, and so it's kind of been tied up with the kind of heritage narrative for that reason, which may confuse people a little bit, because it's kind of putting buildings that don't have the same heritage value within that kind of category. And I think also if you have a blanket kind of listing for every building, it maybe dilutes the message. I think the positive is that it's asking people to question, and you can see this in multiple examples across the country, but probably the most obvious one is the Marks & Spencer's building on Oxford Street, is that people are asking the question, why are you demolishing this and building it new when you've got perfectly good existing building already on the site? Yeah. And I think that is the conversation we need to be having.
Jo, we're at UKREiiF. There's lots of developers here. What's your message to them?
My message would be to get things right first from the beginning. So to really utilise and understand the existing building before you even decide of how you then want to plan and implement your proposals. But get it right first. There's no point in thinking about it for just a 5-year, 10-year gain. We've got to be thinking about things for much longer than that, learning from the buildings that have stood for hundreds of years. They've stood because they're well built, well understood, well created, and of good material. So we want to make sure that happens for the future and continues to happen.
Thank you for watching. To learn more about Purcell and the work that they do, you can go to purcelluk.com, and for all the latest property news and insight, visit placenorthwest.co.uk.